I'm not going to comment on each of the individual papers. What I try to do to be as brief as possible is to identify a few problems that emerged from their field experiences and that, as a matter of fact, resonated with my own experiences. So I identified four problems, and I'm just going to present them as problems, as questions, without trying really to answer them, because I'm in no position in any case to try to give a solution to this problem. Well, the first problem that's really underlying all the papers is the problem of distance, or the problem of the right distance. Is it necessary to keep distance from the people we are working with? Is there a right distance? And then it comes to the question of disagreement. I mean, I was shocked, to be honest, when I read at least two of those papers who stated that there were disagreements with the people, the students were working with what would have been called in another terminology, the informants. And I said, whoa, man, it's impossible to disagree with informants. You don't have a right to disagree with informants. You have to record what they say.
They are further than we.
Yeah, but that's to be discussed. And maybe the question is tied to the question of the time. I mean, the temporal duration of the investigation. There might be times when we can disagree. There might be times when we don't have to think in terms of disagreement, although we may eventually agree or disagree. I mean, that's a bit of a tricky question, but which also raises the question we've all been confronted with: what do we do with so-called informants who become friends? And they still talk to us, and they still provide us with very interesting information on the things we are studying. But how do we treat that information? And here, yes, I mean, it comes, that's what I wanted to say, it comes to the idea that was introduced by Eric Gable, was saying, of moral mutuality. And here again, how do we reach this particular stage of moral mutuality? And here, just an aside on the Mexican penguin, because that's exactly the same problem I've been confronted with when I did my work in Cape Town. Because in Cape Town, the people who organize and participate in the New Year festivals, I mean, they call themselves spoons. For some historical reasons, I'm not going to go into that. And they are always offended when Americans come to Cape Town and say, oh, you don't have a right, you can't call yourself. I mean, you don't have a right to use that word. It's awful, it's derogatory. And Americans don't understand that words travel and that the meanings change. And it's interpreted in Cape Town, exactly the same way it's been interpreted in Mexico, as one more example of American arrogance. So you've got to be extremely careful about that, not to mention that this type of arrogance is based on an ignorance of the new literature. When I say new, it's been started like 30 years ago, on the history of blackface minstrelsy in the United States, which gives to the character of the coon or of the blackface minstrel a totally different and much more complex dimension, and we have to take that into account when we're dealing with that sort of thing. Second, and probably still on the question of distance, one of the problems that arises today, and John Galati, I think, emphasized it, is the problem of how do we define the group we are working with or we are working on. How do we delimitate what is called the field? I mean, when anthropologists used to go to one particular village or one particular archipelago, like Malinowski went to the Trobriands and he was studying, the Trobriands, and that was his field. But now, when Veronique, is working here, I mean, she's working in the countryside, she's working in Montreal, she's working with people, the same people in the countryside and in Montreal. Where is the field? What is the group which is being studied? And I think we have to think about that. I mean, delimitation of the field, definition of the group. The second problem is the place, the role of the investigator. I'm not going to dwell at length here. My own position would be that whatever happens and whatever type of relationship develops is that the investigator is still an investigator. And I think the story that's been told, I mean, when I say story, it's the relation that's been given to us by Jan Peterson about having his own chair in the shooting gallery is very telling in that respect. I mean, whatever type of relationship he entertained with the owner of the gallery or the people who were in the gallery, I mean, he had his own chair that included him while giving him a particular place in this location. And probably one of the things that you mentioned the question of writing or developing a narrative about who we are and what we are doing and why we are doing it there. And I think this is very important to think in terms of the narratives, which doesn't mean lies, but the narrative, the way we can explain to other people what we do, why we do it, and where we stand in the particular relationship that develops. And of course, that, to me, I mean, in my own experience, that brings back, and this is the third problem, the question of the mutual representations, the representations that the investigator has of the investigated, and the representations that the investigated have of the investigators. And the problem is that, of course, I mean, those representations, they are different, and they will remain different, but they may change in the course of the investigation, in the course of the development of the research relationship, the research rapport that happens through time. And here again, the question of time is very important. And in terms of this question of the mutual representations, I mean, I'd like just to mention a book which is a very good parable about the type of relationship that may develop between people who are investigated and the investigators, which is the book, the study by Benetta Jules Rosette, The Messages of Tourist Art, when she analyzes the way the carvers are carving something because of the representation they have of the representations the potential buyers may have of what is tourist art, while the buyers have a certain idea of tourist art, which is strengthened, which is confirmed by the type of artifact that they buy. And then, of course, I mean, if something doesn't sell, the carver will have to adapt and change. And if the buyer doesn't find what he expects to find as African art, he will buy what he finds, saying, well, I mean, I was wrong, this is African art. And maybe in the anthropological relation, there's something like this that happens, and that brings us back to the idea of investigation as performance. Then the final point I wanted to underline is the problem of reciprocity, and precisely because at least two of the papers, or maybe three, deal with involve studying music, and involve, again, representations, including expectations on the part of the people who are investigated about the role that the investigator may play in terms of helping them to commercialize or to get money, well, for that matter, from the music they are doing. And I think here again, the only possible answer lies in a permanent role classification. I mean, as far as I am concerned, and I could give examples of what I've done, and this is not unique by any way. I mean, I know it because I've done it, but many other people have gone through the same type of experiences. It's very important to always stress that the researcher is a researcher. I mean, it's not, he or she is not an agent. He or she is not a promoter. And that in the course of the investigation, as investigation, and here again we come back to the question of the time of the investigation, the duration of the investigation, the anthropological relationship, I'm going to use a very strong word here, should not be polluted by any false expectations about the role that the investigator may play in commercializing the music or whatever art form the people he or she is working with are doing. This is one particular point, but reciprocity can be broadened to include what some people would call political involvement. And here again, I mean, this is a very tricky, very complex question, very tricky question. I would like just to mention someone who's done a very, very interesting, who's conducted and enacted a very interesting reflection about that. His name is Guy Poitvin. He used to be French. He became an Indian citizen, and he worked in Pune in Maharashtra. And in particular, he worked he worked with and among Dalit women, untouchable women in Maharashtra, and he was at the same time, he conceived of himself as an anthropologist and a social activist. And he developed the idea of the notion of cooperative research action. And I think looking at what he's done is absolutely fascinating, whether you agree with his behavior and his involvement in the struggle of Dalit people in Maharashtra or not. But it's very, from a social science point of view, it's very interesting looking at what he's done. And if you Google Guy Poitvin, the first site that appears on the screen is a site that is dedicated to him, and that's bilingual. Guy Poitvin living in India, he could read Sanskrit and speak Indian Marathi. Is that right? Yeah. The local language and so on and so on. But the website is bilingual, and he wrote quite a number of books in English, which mostly are published in India by the
website's great.
Yeah, the website. Yeah. Okay. So that's all I want. So those four problems and distance, the role of the anthropologist, mutual representations, and reciprocity.
Okay. We're just going to open up the floor. Do you want to moderate? Do you want me to moderate? Or you want to...
Well, you do it.
I'll manage.
Yeah, you'll do it.
Okay.
You're going to be more strict than
Okay. And just to remind you that after the session, we'll take a brief coffee break. At the end of the next session, in other words, around 5 o'clock, we plan on having some kind of cheese to kind of celebrate the end of the workshop. Hope you'll stay with us until then. So we'd like to begin.
There are just 2 or 3 very brief comments I want to make, and they are just random thoughts. When you are talking about the money problem in the field, that really raises a very important issue, especially in certain parts of the world where you are working. In native North America, it has been an issue for a very long period of time. And in my anthropologist at Zuni, from my friend Flora Zuni, I have a long quote in which she says that Miss Benedict was paying me $10 per hour in 1924 when I was translating what she got from the informants. Miss Bunzel, on the other hand, was paying me just 50 cents. So Benedict died in 1948, so I could not ask her. So I asked Bunzel what was the situation. So Bunzel, called Bunny, was Boas's secretary, and Ruth Benedict was deaf. And after giving her a PhD, Boas wanted her to do some field work. So she says, Ruth, why don't you go to the Zunis? I was there when Kroeber was there, and you are interested in mythology, and they have a wonderful fellow who knows everything about mythology. I met him, his name was Nick Tumaka. Kroeber considered him the great intellectual of Zuni. So he said that go there and remember and collect whatever he remembers. In a way, Benedict really did not know any Zunis. He was there just for 4 months. She really did not know the field, whatever that we call field. Bunzel, on the other hand, was a very accomplished linguist. She really became the best ethnographer of Zuni. He spent 29 months there, had taken lessons about language with Edward Sapir. And she said that, Loki, as you know, I was Boaz's assistant. Boaz said, Ruth, why don't you go with Ruth? Go to Zuni. You have been asking me to send you somewhere. So I had no money. Elsie Cluse Parsons had given me just $500. So I had to worry about money. I don't remember what I was paying, but I was paying. But Flora said that I got enough money that summer that I built a new house where these anthropologists could stay comfortably. When I went to the Navajos, I had just $100 for what we call hospitality gifts. I had a grant from NSF. In 8 days, I spent $68 buying booze. My informant, his name was John Chato, after the anthropologist John Roberts. His son was Clyde Chato, after the anthropologist Clyde Cluckhahn. Wife was Nanine Chato, after the anthropologist Nan Vogt, Evan Vogt's wife. And the son had spent some time with the Mormons who had brainwashed him. So he claimed that he had forgotten his Athabascan language. But his parents were always complaining how stingy this Indian was. Whenever somebody came, they said, give him $10. So all I had was $100 for the whole month. And if I giving $10 to anybody came, I had no money. I had come from India with $8 in my pocket. And they did not take care of me even for 8 days. So I had no money. I had to worry about money. So I will give limited amount. So in Athabascan, they started to say this fellow is very stingy because I had no money. But in retrospect, I started to remember that at least I was earning $400 a month in my fellowship. That was the annual income of that family. So I could see their obsession with money, and I can see my problem with money. So money is really quite tricky. And the anthropologist Bina Das from India, who is now the head honcho at Johns Hopkins, and Jonathan Perry, Leach's student, who is the head honcho at London School of Economics. So in the journal Man in 1983, they wrote a piece in which they were saying that money is corrupting the quality of social research in India, because these Americans, they did not name Canadians, so I'm not going to say Canadians. So they said these Americans, these British people are bringing, their students are bringing a lot of money and paying to their informants. And as a result, it is becoming very difficult for the Indian researchers to go and work with the people, because they are preferring to work with the foreigners who have come there. The last comment I want to make about is friend, that in some respect, as you know, we take our own cultural baggage to the field when we go. So David Snyder and his collaborator, Jack Roberts, wrote a wonderful piece, The Zuni Kin Terms. They rank 34 terms from Zuni kinship domain, mother, father, brother, sister, and so on. And the 34th, they add friend. And in the ranking, the friend appears 34th. So in many, many cultures, friend does not mean anything. And as a result, you should be really quite clear what you are really investigating when you are invoking that term.
We'll take a few comments from the audience, then we'll come back to the panel.
The interest of a native, let's say in this manner, definition of time. Because we are taking this as a nativist definition, and in many cultures, even label for what we call time, tempo, Zeit, etc., is very difficult to find. I think that is a crucial problem, but not only with music, but in many other kinds of media. The other comment I would like to do is about many often, the production of knowledge has been its purchase. So I think it is very important to highlight this problem. what is exactly a purchase? We have a very interesting tradition in Western knowledge about the kind of thing we can purchase, the kind of thing we cannot purchase. Since Marx's establishment of the concept of use and value of use and value of exchange. So I think that your native, especially, they have read Marx and discovered that knowledge in anthropology is a commodity. I don't know exactly how they think about where is the value. Are they fetishist about the value of the commodity, or they really think that the value of the commodity is the relationship involved in the two societies? The society in which, to speak about, for example, the other is a merchandise or a commodity, and the other society, the natives. Well, and finally, the commentary I would like to make, it's about, again, the question of the state in Weberian terms of sympathy, first state in German, of sympathy or empathy. I think that in many times we had in anthropology, Crapanzano's study about the whites, for example, in South Africa, is not properly based in first state.
No, I didn't say that again.
I'm not sure, but it's not clear at all, because they wrote exactly about the whites. So I think that the question of Leah's presentation is very interesting about this question of sympathy and empathy, and how to get this in a universe where there is absolutely no possibility to get a zero-sum result, like in the theater of absurd. Yeah. That's all.
Obviously, Pascal and to a different extent, Alexandre have touched a chord, because this is an issue. I mean, it's interesting to me that people are going through exactly the same kinds of things, the kinds of things that we had to negotiate 30 or 40 years ago. But I would like to say that everything is symbolic, especially money. And it has a special place in our particular world. And it's increasingly having a special place in other people's world, as you say, as other people understand that things can be commoditized that have not. I would just like to say two things. One is that anthropologists have written a huge amount about money in the field, but not always in those forms. We have been writing about the gift. And I'd just like to say that we have certain kinds of economic, symbolic, and social capital. And the people that we're working with have other kinds, usually other kinds of symbolic, economic, and social capital that Paul Rabinow was a perfect native informant for what we think that there is pure relationship of friendship and that it's different from money, but that in most societies, and in ours too, although we don't think of it in those terms, you have to have a certain amount of reciprocity. And so I think the issue is how you can be in a reciprocal relationship, because the fact is you're a big nuisance being there, probably. You may be actually using up their resources, and there has to be something that you can give back. In every society, in my experience, there are people who actually are natural intellectuals, naturally sociable, natural ethnographers, and you're going to find people who really like to talk to you for no particular reason. But you take them out to lunch or you'll do something else. And I think there's no reason to fetishize money as such, but rather to think about how it is that you can reciprocate. And that's about all I have to say. I mean, we do have resources that they don't, and vice versa, and we don't have just non-mediated I-to-thou relationships with people. They're mediated, but it may not be through money, but it's something that we give them as well as that they give us.
Anyone would like to respond on the panel?
Actually, there's lots of fascinating stuff. I just wanted to mention on your point, it was interesting to me in thinking about this talk that really they were the capitalists and I was the pre-capitalist. You know, friendship is something we don't commoditize, or we don't like to commoditize, you know.
We have lots of to give.
Sure, but I
This is
mean,
a question for you.
yeah. So, but I wanted to point out to your comment that I'm not saying that anthropologists have not had anthropology of money or developed anthropology of money like Maus. My point is just about the way money influences field worker decisions in the field. And I think very often that's part of reflexivity. I think that should be part of reflexivity, and very often it is not. And on the question of reciprocity, I don't know if we could bring up the projector. I will out myself as impure with respect to the Constant Martin's recent. This was the slide that I skipped. I hope it comes up. How fast is this thing? Let's see. I'm actually organizing, as I mentioned briefly yesterday, a West African drumming workshop starting next week in Montreal, in Quebec City, and in the Toronto area with a West African musician that I'm flying from Europe. He actually lives in Europe now. He is from Guinea. And we're going to spend 3 weeks touring together, and I'm organizing workshops, and you know, I'm giving him money. I'm keeping a little bit of money if people come. And oh yeah, this is our little cards. I mean, if anybody knows drummers, I have some in my bag. And I need people to come because I'm going to look really awful if you know, we did this last year and it worked. But if nobody shows up, I'm like dead, you know. I'm like, so I am a promoter, and I've embraced that. I've embraced the fact that this is a role that people play on the scene. This is something that people do. It builds relationships, and I'm going to do it. Now, is it ethical? Is it not ethical? I don't know, but
Anyway, after I went independent, After I went independent from the university, I decided the world was divided into two kinds of people: those with paychecks and those without. It changes everything. Rappin' out had tenure.
Just to clarify things, I mean, what I meant was that there is...
He didn't have tenure. He didn't have tenure, but he wanted it. So sure.
Well, he got tenure.
Well, not for that book.
Not for that book.
I stand for Sorry.
What I mean is not that you should not do it and that it is impure, that there is a time for research and there is a time for, you know, doing what you do. But I think it creates problems, and that's only at that level. That's not at the ethical level. That's just in terms of, well, you know, epistemology, if you want to put it that way. If you confuse the rules during the research itself, then it may cause problems. Now, it may not be the case everywhere. I don't know.
So you see them as kind of separate registers of practice?
I would tend to think so.
We have people here who have done both, who have done both at different times, and I think there are people here who have done both at the same time. So we might have people to comment on that. On those registers. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment on knowledge, because I like Raphael said, I thought all your papers were really good, and I can easily imagine them published in various forms. They sound really polished and really deep, so it's good. And the thought that I had after hearing them had to do with the whole conference so far, the whole workshop so far. Because another word we've used, of course, is knowledge. We keep saying, you know, and so the question always is, what counts as knowledge? What are you trying to learn, or what are you trying to write about? And once you figure out what you're trying to write about, then a bunch of different avenues for getting getting those sound bites or those images or those vignettes or those compelling pieces to make what you're writing convincing to a reader becomes more and more, maybe more and more obvious. So, for example, with the question of, let's say, that the people who are the government officials who are both exploiting and not treating well their charges, that may be the story you're wanting to tell about Cuba, which is something to do with the way government culture, the production of culture, or the management of culture on the part of the Cuban government, is an incredibly interesting phenomenon. So using those vignettes to tell that story is totally legitimate and part of the learning process. Or likewise with Zimbabwe, I mean, my sense is that one of the clear stories that has to be told and retold about places like Zimbabwe always is the problem of race. You know, there's always that problem of race in there. So using that material to talk something about those stories makes that true. And likewise too with the drummers. I mean, they're all in these commodified worlds, all these art producers in Africa. Mm-hmm. And so one of the main stories that needs to be told about that world is how the commodification works. I mean, how you get clients, how you get people to come and be students, the competition and so forth. So again, the very way that you're learning about it becomes a perfect way to narrate the story, if you will, for other people who are outside the story. And likewise too with this issue there in Mexico. I thought you did perfectly by bringing in those emails and showing the conversation kind of devolves down, because that's the data that makes all these stories come to life, is what I'm trying to get at. And rather than worry about whether or not, I think worrying is good. I mean, worrying is good. Yeah, but worrying in print and for other people to look over your shoulder is even better. As long as you're keeping your eye on the proverbial ball about what is the story that I'm trying to tell. You know, what kind of knowledge am I after? And then one can avoid that kind of a tendency to maybe be overly self-indulgent about one's own guilts or worries, but rather actually get to the story that one wants. That was one comment. But I thought they were all very, very polished and full of interesting potential.
I'm going to be very brief. You know, the problem that you have is, in my view, a very old problem in a different form of what anthropologists, who usually were agnostics, had when they study religion. It's one of the oldest problems. How do you study something that you consider unreal, irreal, counter? That's one of our oldest, and it will stay with us. And it has had the same challenges and probably some of the same answers. Very short. About media, mediation, remedy. I wanted to look up the etymology dictionary. Something is very wrong here with the concepts. Media and mediation hangs together, but remediation, in the sense of healing, has something to do with remedy. And if I'm not mistaken, these are two different etymologies. And of course, you can do what you want, but it's bad Latin.
But it is a bad etymology, but the thing is that they are used.
Yeah.
Those two different ways.
Well, don't contribute.
So
Contribute to that.
We have to go back to the literature on remediation and see if they're conscious of that.
Remediation, and someone who's at Berkeley who may
Are they
uses it all the time. I figure that's where
Because it's not the same thing.
What?
There's a whole book on remediation, and it's
remediation.
and it's used by someone who's at Berkeley who may be one of his teachers. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe that's
remediation.
Maybe that's what it's.
Remediation. Okay.
It's true.
that's why I distinguish
Sorry.
between two different senses, because they're actually those two different senses.
I'm just giving you my sensibility. Why I behaved so bad with you. I absolutely think it is essential that we do everything, not totally deny the materiality of the things that we... No, not okay.
No, I want to
Let me
say something
finish.
about that.
Let me finish. And whether this is 30 seconds or not, for the materiality, I only need 5 seconds. In order to be an expert about autochthonous music in Quebec, I need more. But this is for me, okay. And first I finish. Money. I haven't figured out. There is, of course, a myth about, can I tell it? That he was held captive by an informant. Because he didn't pay up and had to be rescued. True or not true?
Talk about power in the field.
About money. I had also read Marx before I went to the field. And I don't know what it means. I don't know how I got away with it. I've never paid a penny for the spoken word in all these decades. I have done some of the things that you say. Look, I worked with workers, and we worked for 4 months, and they didn't know that in the end I already had it planned, let's have a party and get drunk. So I paid for that. But it was no remuneration, not in their eyes and not in my eyes. I paid for services. When the sorcerer sealed my house, cash on the counter. When the painters came and we talked about their paintings, and what they really wanted was to sell paintings, I bought a painting. These were commodities. They were there. But I think if it was possible for me, it should be possible for others. Because the price that we paid when we paid is, for me, something I never wanted to have enter in the sense. So that sounds so righteous, but that's how it was.
This is a moral point.
No, it's Marx. It's exchange value and not.
But I think that
it's use value or not
your
exchange
point is
value.
moral. Because under the point of view of the other, this is not correct.
And just to add to that, one thing I mentioned in my book is an experience of somebody else, Paula Abron, who works with West African praise singers, and that's their Paula Abron, and that's their business. You know, they trade words for money. That is exactly what they do. And she mentions that there are researchers that have quit working on that topic because they could not deal with that. They just could not cope with the fact that they were trading money for speech.
No, they were not trading. They were selling their services. Perfectly legitimate. That's all.
A couple more comments, and then we're going to break for a coffee.
Let's forget about the word remediation. I'd like to push you, if you are willing, on your comment about mediation and your other talk. And maybe I can preface it a little bit by media study stuff that I've been reading that wants to remove the transport model of communication. Let's get over the transport model. It's not that something's going across, but maybe we can think of medium more as a petri dish, if you will, or a certain kind of environment, or tools, or materiality that can help us look. Having said that, could you comment a little bit more on your comment? In your talk, say that that's the direction we move.
What you just said is exactly the direction in which I wanted to go. And you know, when I get nasty about hearing a piece of music, has to do with mediation. She can tell me anything she wants. These 30 seconds tell me something that none of her words can do. And it's paying to that attention to this, to the materiality of things, to the objects between us, to the the acoustic, the ear rather than eye, is also the material sense. These are sounds. That is very important. And mediation is a very old concept in philosophy, long before we talked about media. Yeah?